Hi Lakewood Math 1 students, this is Miss V again, and this is the third video in your linear equations unit bundle. And in this video, we're going to find two different forms of linear equations. One's called slope-intercept form, and the other one is called standard form. I'm going to write them down, and in the beginning they might not make a lot of sense because they have lots of letters. But we're going to see what these letters mean and how they go together. So standard form is ax plus by equals c, and slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. Now, we've already figured out that little guy named m is slope. What we're learning today is that this guy, b, is our y-intercept. So I want to show you what that looks like before we actually start working some problems. Let's say I have a line, and let's say that line goes through the y-axis at -2, right there. And let's say it has a slope of 1/2, meaning my rise is 1 every time my run is 2. The change in y is 1, the change in x is 2. So I have a slope of 1/2, and I have a point right there where it hits the y-axis at -2. And that's my line. 1/2 is my slope, or m, and b is my y-intercept. And so, knowing those two things, I can create the equation of this line. Y equals 1/2 x plus -2. And instead of saying plus negative, I'm just going to say -2. So let's do a couple of these problems on the left side of the page. They've given us the slope and the y-intercept, and we just have to substitute these numbers into our formula. Y equals 2x minus 1. Y equals -3/5 x plus 4. Y equals -3 x plus 2. Y equals -1x plus 7. Y equals 1/4 x plus 0. And for the last one, y equals -5/2 x minus 3. So now that we've written all of these equations, I want to go the opposite direction and say, could I graph this knowing that that's what the equation is? So let's take a look at the last one on the page. And this -3 is my y-intercept. So that tells me I have a point right here on my line. And then this slope of -5/2 means for every 5 I go down on my y-axis, I go over to the right 2 on my x-axis. So I'm going to need some more points here. This is -3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's make our y-axis go down quite a bit more. And this says every time I go down 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I go over 2, 1, 2. So there would be a point right there. And if I drew a line through those points, I would have a graph of y equals negative 5 halves x minus 3, which is our equation right here in problem number 6. Pretty sweet. So we have another type of formula or form that we can put a linear equation in called standard form. And they've given us some examples here, and they've asked us to convert them to slope-intercept form. And this is a very important skill. In fact, it's one of the reasons we've been practicing two-step equations so hard this first quarter. So when it says to put it in slope-intercept form, another way to say that is get y all by itself over here on the left. See how y is alone on the left? And get all the other stuff on the right side of the equation. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to draw a line where my equal sign is. And there's y, and then there's 2x. And I notice if I subtract 2x here, and of course I have to do the same thing on the right side, that 2x minus 2x gives me 0, and all that's left on the left side of the equation is y. On the right side of the equation, I have negative 2x plus 3, and that is y equals mx plus b. So now I know the slope of this line is negative 2, and the y-intercept is 3. Let's do number 2, because it's a little bit more complicated. We actually have to do 2 steps in number 2. In order to get y isolated on the left side of the equation, I'm going to have to subtract 4x, but I'm also going to have to divide by 5. So let's go ahead and subtract 4x, and we end up with 5y equals negative 4x minus 30. And now let's divide both sides of this equation through by 5. So I get, well, if I divide 5y by 5, I just get y. If I divide negative 4x by 5, I get negative 4/5 x. And if I divide negative 30 by 5, I get 6. So y equals mx plus b. My slope is negative 4/5, and my y-intercept is negative 6. Shall we do a couple more? Let's subtract x from both sides. Notice the first step is always subtracting the x term. It always will be, and that's a handy thing to remember. I think that's what I get when I subtract x from both sides. Now you'll notice I need to divide by negative 3, and I have to remember that that's a negative I'm dividing by. And so I just get y over here when I do that. But this is confusing me. What does it mean when I divide that x term by 3? Well, keep in mind there's a 1 in front of that x, kind of implied. And so this is negative 1x over 3, which we typically write as negative 1/3 x. And that's a much more clear way to write it, because I can obviously see that my slope is negative 1/3 here. So I can't just divide the x term by 3. I have to divide by negative 3. Oh, and this was a negative 3. Yes, it's important to remember that. Notice I divided negative 1x by negative 3, which would give me a positive slope of positive 1/3. So there's a real easy spot for mistakes when you're dividing by a negative. Keep that in mind. And now I'm dividing by 12 by negative 3, because I have to divide the whole right side by negative 3, and that gives me negative 4. So my equation in slope-intercept form here is y is equal to positive 1/3 x minus 4. Now what I'd like you to do is I would like you to pause the video and do problems 4, 5, and 6, and then check your answers, because I'm going to put them up in just a second. And that's it for your third video on linear equations. Make sure to ask good questions and get the homework for this video.